Greetings, bike travelers and bike packers. Welcome to another episode of Chain Wheel Diaries, stories about bike travel told by the travelers themselves. I'm your host, Brian Berlin. Do cows appreciate Shakespeare? My guest today has recited Shakespeare while pedaling alone through Montana with only a few cattle listening in. Good story. Taylor is an actor that has appeared in film, television, and theater, and you may have seen him in one of his many acting performances. He's also the co-host of Bike Talk, a podcast about prioritizing bicycle transportation, and we're going to dig into that subject as well. Taylor's also going to share his epic bike adventure as he pedals from San Francisco to Lansing, Michigan to visit his 101-year-old father. Now let's meet Taylor Nichols. Welcome to the show, Taylor. It is wonderful to meet you.
Brian, it's really nice to be here.
So tell us about yourself and where you are at the moment.
Alrighty. Well, I'm Taylor Nichols, and I'm an actor. And when an actor needs or wants to get a job, they are told to plan a trip. So I had planned a trip that I've been really wanting to do almost my whole life for as long as I can remember. And that's go for a really long bike ride from point A to point B. I've done a few short trips for a week or 10 days or something like that, but never anything really long. And while I didn't have the need to put my back tire in the Pacific Ocean and my front tire in the Atlantic Ocean, I did want to cover some ground. And so I decided to plan a trip from San Francisco, where my daughters live, to East Lansing, Michigan, where my 101-year-old father still lives and where I grew up. And I kind of thought in the back of my mind, I'll get a job and I'll postpone this and, I'll do it sometime, but I never got a job. I didn't get a job, which is, often par for the course. You never really know what's going to happen. So I started off on this adventure and I kissed my wife goodbye and I rode my bike. I live in Los Angeles, from my
As
house
do I.
down. Oh, great. Down to Union Station and I caught the train and I put my bike on the train and went up to San Francisco where my daughters live, where our daughters live, and spent a couple of days with them. And then I rode across the Golden Gate Bridge on my way to the Mackinac Bridge. And currently, right now, I'm about 42 days into the trip, and I booked a job. So, and it was the kind of job I didn't want to pass up. It wasn't just a guest star on a TV show. It was a good little role in a movie, and the script I think is really wonderful, and the cast is good. So they said they would fly me back from Minneapolis. So I put on my big boy pants and put my head down and rode through the wind to get to Minneapolis. And I flew back to Los Angeles yesterday. So currently, right now, I'm in LA.
Okay, you're an actor, director, writer, film producer. You were in Jurassic Park 3, which, by the way, in my humble opinion, is one of the most underrated films in that franchise. I
Oh,
love that.
wow.
Love that movie. I thought it was well cast and a good plot. It was tons of fun. And you're a
Yeah.
bicycler, and
Yep.
you also have a podcast about bicycling called Bike Talk.
Correct.
And currently, like you said, you're riding across the US to visit your 101-year-old father. We'll talk about that. That's very intriguing. But let's start with your epic bike adventure. I'd like to know what inspired you to undertake this. There must have been some real driver. You said if you're an actor, you want a job, travel, but there's more to it than that. So share,
Yes.
please.
Yes. Well, I've always been a backpacker and a camper, and I've always liked that. And there's something about being on your own. And I must tell you, I'm not that comfortable being on my own. The few times I've been backpacking on my own, I've been a little bit I don't want to say scared, that's not the right word, but a little bit uncomfortable sort of. And so I think maybe this was also an adventure that I wanted to test my mettle on a little bit. So I tried to find 2 points that were 4,000 miles away because again, I really did want to spend some time on the road and meet people along the way. And sometimes you don't do that if you're out just for 3 or 4 days. That doesn't get quite the same amount of interest that people who pass you on the road say, "Where are you going? Where are you coming from?" And when you're in the middle of North Dakota and you say you came from Los Angeles, or in my case, San Francisco, people's ears prick up and they want to know a little bit more about it. So I did want to do a longer ride. And then the idea came of connecting my daughters, which I'm such a part of their upbringing, to my father, who was such a part of my upbringing. And our family is fairly close, but my time on the road has made a close family even closer. And that's been one of the benefits of the trip.
All right, you left San Francisco. What route were you taking? And gradually spin some tales about all the interesting people you've met along the way and some of the adventures you've experienced.
Well, I used the adventure cycling maps as a roadmap. I joined the organization. I've been aware of them for years, but I'd never actually joined. And I joined and started to do some research on all of the routes that they list on their interactive map, which is really wonderful.
Yes, it
And
is.
I knew I wanted to go from San Francisco to Michigan, and I knew that May and June were good times for me to go because that's often a slow time for an actor. A lot of the network TV shows are down and things. I was a little bit afraid that if I went east immediately from San Francisco, I would get to the mountains and it might still be snowy or cold or some of the roads closed. So I decided to go up the coast, up the California coast through Fort Bragg and Eureka and Crescent City into Oregon, up to Florence, Oregon, and then cut east. And sort of what I didn't really take into consideration was how far and how difficult that ride was going to be. That was about 800 miles and overwhelming headwinds along most of that route, as
I've
well
heard.
as whenever you ride on the coast, it's up, down, up, down, up, down. And so that was just a tough section of the ride for me. But I met people along the way there who were very supportive. A couple of people I have interviewed for our show, Bike Talk, Nick Richard and I do Bike Talk together. And Nick is on the East Coast, and I'm, of course, here on the West Coast. And we try to incorporate, like you do on Chain Wheel Diaries, people's stories. And so it was really fun to meet some people. One young man that I met, Jake Hess, was riding from Canada to Mexico along the coast. And it's just interesting to hear who is doing these kinds of rides, why they're doing them, and at what stage of their life are they doing them. I'm in my 60s, and so that's a completely different stage. Jake is in his late 20s, and he's taking time out from his life to do this adventure. I also met a really wonderful woman, Kay, who is 71, and she rode the first, well, not the first, but the sort of most well documented cross country ride in 1976, the Trans-American
Mm.
route. She rode that when she was 21, and now 50 years later at 71, she's doing it again. So it's there's a camaraderie with people that are on the road, and you often see them more than once, and you connect, and it's really nice to become friends because we're sharing a similar experience.
Where did you make a right turn and begin to head east?
In Florence, Oregon. And this is a great anecdote. I got stuck in the rain and it was pouring, and I had to make about a 60-mile ride to meet a friend of mine who was going through a fair amount of effort and expense to meet me for a few days on the ride. So I didn't want to disappoint him and, be a day or possibly 2 days late. So here I am, sitting in the rain. I wasn't able to rent a car. There was no bus. There was no train. So I'm hitchhiking with my loaded bike in the rain. And of course, no one is stopping. And I'm like, oh my God, my buddy is going to be so upset that I'm, really a day and a half away from meeting him and it's going to upset his journey and all that. And sure enough, a woman rode by in the rain, named Sherry, and she was on an e-bike, and she said, "Well, get on my wheel and let's ride." So I said, "Okay," and I got on her wheel, and we rode about 10 miles together. And while we were riding, she explained that her partner was going to pick her up when her partner passed her on the road. And sure enough, after about 10 miles, her partner passed us and stopped her RV and put both of our bikes on the back of the RV. And they offered me to sit in their clean, nice, dry car, and I was all wet. They offered me a beer, and they drove me all the way to my destination, which was about 45, 50 miles out of their way. And that's the kind of people that you meet on a trip like this. You meet people that are willing to go out of their way to help you because they know what you're going through. And sure enough, Sherry and her partner had ridden across the country about 10 years previous. And so they understood
So they knew.
what was going on. Yes.
Yeah, I had a guest last year, Chris Compton. He was in a rainstorm and he was offered a ride. And he told him, he said, "You're not going to believe this, but I want to keep riding. I'm going to go every inch." And the guy said, "Fine. When you get into town, come to my house. We'll put you up."
Yeah.
And Chris said, "Where are you?" And he said, "Well, I don't know my address." He said, "There's a monastery, a big red monastery, and we're right next door to that." And sure enough, Chris rode into town, and there's the house, and there's the guy standing on the porch waiting for him. Not only did they put him up, but it turns out they gave him references for his next 3 nights of
Oh,
people who found out about his ride and put him up. And I think that's the story that I hear
yeah.
the most often of people riding their bikes across the United States is the kindness of strangers, and not only their kindness, but how much they'll go out of their way to help you out.
Yep, yep. And it's also funny, I must say, when I was in North Dakota and people would talk to me and I would say that I'm from Los Angeles, they would go, "Oh, Los Angeles, wow, is it safe? Are you scared? Is it dangerous? I would never live. It's just too dangerous." And then when I would tell my friends in San Francisco that I'm riding through North Dakota, they would go, "Oh my God, is it safe? Do people have guns? Have you been threatened? What's going on?" And
Perception.
exactly. And here we are. Everyone has been so generous and so helpful, both in Los Angeles and in North Dakota. And we're sort of told by the media that each of the other is the bad person or something like that. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
I think that's true. So I listened to your podcast and the episode and your interview in Ovando, Montana.
Yeah.
Tell us
Yeah.
about that. That was a great interview, but I want to hear you tell it.
Well, this was right after I left Missoula, Montana, and Missoula is sort of, and I've used this word before, the mecca of, cross-country cycling. That's the
It
home of
is.
adventure cycling and all of that. And I had stopped in Missoula, and I had interviewed Josh Bowden, who works for Adventure Cycling, a whole series of interviews about how to plan and how to prepare for a trip like this, and he was really helpful. So I really enjoyed stopping by the Adventure Cycling office and meeting Josh in person and some of the other people and seeing the beautiful office and all of that. And the next day I was leaving and I wasn't sure where I was going. And it rained in the morning, so I got kind of a late start. And that always messes up your miles for that day because I was looking forward to getting 20 or 30 miles in by, noon or something like that. And so as the day went on, I was more and more anxious about where I was going to sleep that night. And the dark clouds were rolling in and it was kind of sprinkling raining. And I had some food with me, but I didn't have a lot of food with me. And I wasn't sure if the little towns in front of me would have a market or a restaurant or not. And so I decided to go to this little town, Ovando. Um, and I got there just after the market closed. And luckily I had a little bit of food on me, but not a lot, and I wasn't sure where I was going to camp. And I looked across the little square of the little town, and there was a restaurant that said Stray Bullet Restaurant, open 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I thought, oh, darn, I missed that restaurant too. I missed that option for food. But I noticed there were people in the restaurant and a couple of cars parked out front. So I went over to the restaurant and opened the door and walked in, and a woman greeted me, and I said, "Are you open?" And she said, "Yes, we are, but it's reservation only." And that's just because it's such a small town. They need to know how many
Mm.
meals to prepare. And then she said, "But I think we have enough food if you'd like to have dinner." And I thought, well, yeah, I'd like to have dinner.
Serendipity.
And yeah, totally. And they were serving prime rib that night
Oh,
because again, they do it by reservation, and that's sort of the prefix menu. And so I went from being a little bit worried about where I was going to sleep and what I was going to eat to sitting at the bar in this really cute little log cabin restaurant, eating prime rib and drinking red wine. And it couldn't have been more precious. It was just so nice. And then the woman who runs the restaurant, she told me that, well, this is actually a very friendly cycling town. We have a hoosegow and an old-time jail, and we have a covered wagon, and we have a teepee that cyclists can sleep in. So you don't have to set up your tent. You can be out of the wind and be in these places. And so I went and looked at the covered wagon and the teepee, and then I looked at the hoosegow, they call it. That's, an old-time jail. And I chose the old-time jail, and I brought my stuff in and put my sleeping bag on the cot that was there and slept like a baby. It was really nice. And I must add, Brian, I found out later, I noticed there were all these signs like be bear aware, the tent commandments about really being careful with your food. And again, enough of a backpacker that I understand you have to put your food and your toiletries
yep.
away so that bears don't go foraging into your tent. Well, I put everything in the bear box and kind of didn't really worry about it. And then a couple of days later, when I was 150 miles past Ovando, I told someone that I had just slept there, and they said, "Oh my God, that's where that woman cyclist was killed 5 years ago."
Oh
And
my
I went,
goodness.
"What?" And he said, "Yeah, by a grizzly bear." And so
Oh,
I was like, "Oh boy, I was glad I was in the hoosegow and not in a tent, and I was glad that I followed the tent commandments of putting all your food away."
yeah, they don't put that in the brochure, do they?
No,
That,
yeah,
all right. From Ovando, I think you were headed to Great Falls, Montana, which is famous for Lewis and Clark. They had to portage around the falls
yeah.
in order to continue their journey. Tell me, what did you experience on that route?
Well, that was when the ride really changed. I had been in the mountains. First of all, along the coast, it was up and down. And then
Hmm.
Oregon and Idaho were lots of mountains and lots of climbing. And then all of a sudden, I get into, you know, central Montana and eastern Montana, and the roads flattened out a little bit, not flat, but not severely up or down. And I was put on roads following the ACA maps that had no cars. And it was
Mm.
just a treat.
Yeah.
I was on a road by myself. I went from Great Falls up to Fort Benton and spent some time there, which is a really beautiful little town where Lewis and Clark were. And then I went to Geraldine, where Lewis and Clark had been, and then Lewistown, which I assume is named for Lewis of Lewis and
Mm.
Clark. And on these roads, I was often the only one around for 5, 6, 8, 10 minutes sometimes. And when a
Mm.
car came, you would hear it from maybe a mile away, literally, and wait 20, 30, 40 seconds until it passed you. And there was enough space on the road that there was no problem with the car buzzing me or anything like that. So it was really one of the more pleasant stretches of the ride.
I really want to understand, what's going on in your mind as you're riding along alone. What are some of the thoughts that come through your head? I know I've had some deep conversations. Maybe you did as well.
Yeah, with yourself, right. Absolutely. I would recite a lot of Shakespeare to the cattle that are on the side of the road, and that was fun. I would, sort of scream sometimes because there was no one around except maybe a few cattle. And so I did a lot of that. I did a lot of talking to myself about things I wish I had said to people in certain situations, or things I will say to people if a certain situation arises. But I also just did a lot of meditation. There's something about the metronome of pedaling that just put me in a state of relaxation and concentration and breathing. It was really a positive experience. It was like meditating with breath. You know how in yoga there's the breath of fire,
Yeah.
or something like that. I would often do those kinds of exercises when I was on the bike, breathing exercises, really deep breathing, and that invigorated me. It relaxed me and rested me and invigorated me all at the same time if those three things are possible.
I 100% agree. I think that the sound of your tires on the pavement is kind of a lulling kind of
Right.
sound. The rhythm of the cadence of what you're doing really opens up your mind to the possibilities. And like you say, you really soak in your surroundings at the
Yeah.
same time. I love you were reciting Shakespeare to the cattle. By the way, they're big fans of Shakespeare.
Absolutely.
They're
Right.
very well read, especially in Montana.
Exactly. Yeah. I would find that there would be 10, 15-mile stretch almost every day where I would really push it, where I would really just go, and I'd get up out of the saddle on the climbs, and I'd get down into a tuck on the descents, and I would, push a little bit bigger gear. And then I also found there was a 20, 30 minute period every day almost where I got really sleepy, and I almost would feel like I was going to fall asleep on the bike. And occasionally I did get off the bike and lie down either on the side of the road or if there was a picnic table or something like that. And a couple of times I just fell asleep, for
Mhm.
I don't know, 5 minutes or something like that. And it again it you sort of wake up and you feel fresh from that cat nap and you get back on the bike and go.
Yeah, I rode last summer. I rode with a friend. We rode the Katy Trail across
Oh
Missouri.
yeah.
There are frequent rest stops or trailheads, and they were always tables that were sheltered. We always used those to take a nap.
Right.
It was a great way. In the middle of the day in the Midwest, as you know, it can get really hot and humid. It's great to get out of the sun and grab some Z's. All right, you've told us about the planning part, and that's the adventure cycling, using their routes. They're a wonderful organization. I've been a member
Right.
for, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years now. What about the equipment? What do you ride and what were you carrying?
That's a great question. And it took me a little while. Again, I've done this before on short trips. So I
Hmm.
knew that I was going to need, cooking gear and some camping gear. And I was camping 3, 4 nights, staying in a hotel on the fourth or fifth night, and then camping again. Um, I have a midnight special, a Surly midnight special
Hmm.
bike, and it's a road bike, but it's a light gravel road bike, and I put some really nice road tires on it because 90% of the riding that I've been doing on this trip has been on the road. I have ridden on
Paved.
gravel
Yeah.
and on dirt roads, but
Hmm.
uh, but the bike did really well. Then I have four Ortlieb panniers, two in the back and two small ones in the front that connect to my forks. And then on top of the panniers in the back, I have a dry sack with all of my camping equipment, with my tent, my
Okay.
pad, my sleeping bag, and that has worked pretty well. It has kept the weight pretty even. I interviewed someone on Bike Talk one time who had ridden across the country, and he said that it took him a couple of weeks to figure out the packing. And I have learned that that is absolutely true. It took
Yeah.
me a couple of weeks to learn it also, where everything is, where do I want to put things so I can get them easily. What things do I not need? What things would I drop if I had a choice? What do I need? Should I buy anything? And luckily, I overpacked only a little bit. So I didn't have to buy anything. But there were a few things that I haven't used. Live and learn, I guess. But the bike has been balanced well. Occasionally it will shimmy, that feeling
Hmm.
when there's weight
Yeah.
on the bike and the front wheel will shimmy. But that's usually because I have more water in one of the front packs than in the other front pack. And so the weight is off a little bit. But when I balance those, I can ride no handed with the bike loaded.
Hmm.
And that's nice to be able to sit up and stretch and your hands are the things that take the real beating because you lean onto your hands onto the handlebars for 8 hours, 9 hours, and they can take a little bit of a beating. So I wore gloves to help with that also.
So weight distribution and packing, those are really important. Even on overnights, which I
Yeah,
do frequently, I'll unpack at camp and the next morning I'll think, I probably could rearrange this just a little bit differently. And in my mind, it made a difference. I'm not sure that it actually did,
right,
but it
right.
it satisfied my obsessive need to mess around with things a little bit and see if I can find some improvement. So that's great.
Yeah.
I
When we were, sorry, when we
no.
were in Mitchell, it's a very little town, one restaurant, one market, a feed store, but there is a cycling hostel called Spoken Hostel, and they have about 10 beds and a big yard if you want to set up your tent. But they have 10 beds in the hostel, and you bring your bike right into it's an old church. So you bring your bike right into the main area of the hostel and you put your bike by your bed, then stay there. And then in the basement, they have a community room with where you make breakfast and coffee, and they have all kinds of books and maps. It's really a wonderful spot. And I happened to be staying there when 5 or 6 other people were there who were on a gravel bike riding trip. And the only reason I bring it up is because in the morning, when we all got up and were having coffee and getting ready to, take off on our own separate routes, one of the guys says, and the packing begins. And he was so right because we all spent about 20 minutes figuring out how we wanted to pack everything. And it was just really fun to see how the different people packed their bikes differently and what they had and all of that.
Oh, it's amazing. Yes. I go on these weekend trips with a group of people and I pay close attention to what they're doing to see if they do it the same way every time. I'm not that organized. I think I change it every time and wonder why some stuff doesn't go back in the panniers like it did on the
Right.
trip out. I mean, the night before you go on one of those trips, you've got plenty of time to think about it and organize. When you're getting up in the morning, getting ready to go, you don't have quite as much time.
Right.
So
Right.
that may be part of it. All
And you do
right.
have to prepare for the hot or the cold
Yes.
or the rain
Yes.
or the dry.
Yes.
I always found the biggest volume taker-upper of my packs was the food because I was going through areas where oftentimes 60, 70 miles at a stretch, there were no services. So I really did need to bring two extra, not water bottles like a bike water bottle, but two extra liter size water bottles and enough food that if I couldn't find any food, I had something for dinner that night.
It's unreal how much water weighs on your bike when you're carrying extra water.
Right.
So you made it through Montana, and when did you cross into Minnesota? You went through North Dakota or South Dakota?
North North Dakota. And right around the time I was in Montana, I got the job that would bring me back to Los Angeles. So I had, and it's hard to gauge how many miles you can do a day depending on the topography, the weather, the wind. So I had to kind of figure out how was I going to get to Minneapolis because that's where they were flying me out of. And so I literally for three days in a row, I did centuries each day so that and I wasn't necessarily racing because I had to get to Minneapolis. The wind was behind me, and I was in that kind of mood of wanting to push because
Hmm.
in the mountains you just can't do that many miles
No.
with the long, long climbs. So I went through Fargo, and then once I got to Fargo, North Dakota, I knew I was going to make it to Minneapolis in time. And I think I spent 2 nights getting from Fargo to Minneapolis. And it's really fun, Brian. Friend of Bike Talk, a guy who has been on the show as an advocate in Minneapolis, Brett McGraw is his name. He actually found out that I was going to Minneapolis and he said, well, listen, I'd love to ride out to meet you. So he rode out about 50 miles from his home in Minneapolis and met me and sort of escorted me into Minneapolis, which was really nice because the day that I rode into Minneapolis, I had to do about 105 miles and I was tired. And it was nice to have someone to ride with, to talk, to break the wind a little bit, but to also show me some shortcuts to get into town. So that was really nice.
When are you headed back to Minneapolis to finish the ride?
I finished shooting on Thursday of this week. That's the 2nd of July, and then I'm going to spend the 3rd of July with my wife, and then I'm going to fly back on the 4th, and I'll start riding again on July 5th.
When do you think you'll reach your destination?
I think I'll be there July 13th. That's my plan. I have some friends from home, from Michigan, that live in Ann Arbor or Lansing or Chicago, and we have been doing bike rides every summer for the last 3 or 4 years. Kind of easy bike rides, 2 or 3 days, and staying in Airbnbs and stuff like that, just as a way to almost like you might do a fishing trip with your friends.
Hmm.
And they are all going to meet me when I get off the ferry in Ludington, Michigan. I'm going to take the Badger ferry across the lake, and they're going to meet me there and ride with me the rest of the way to my dad's house, which is really nice. I'm really looking forward to seeing them, and I'm glad that they're going to be a part of this adventure.
And please give your father my best regards. That's quite an achievement, 101 years old, and like you say, he's still active,
Yes.
still drives, even though you'd rather he didn't.
Yeah.
Plays a little golf.
Yeah.
Props to him. That's
You know
really
what he
it's
does,
really great.
Brian? Yeah, he volunteers a lot. He has been raising money for charities and organizations in Lansing, where he's lived for, 70 of his 100 years. And so he's very active in that area by being involved in raising money for those organizations. And he even raised money to build a school in Sudan and has been very active there. We have a picture of all these people, children included, from this little village in Sudan holding a life-size picture of my dad because he's the one who raised the money for their school. And so that's also, I think, what's kept him healthy and
I
active and
agree.
young. Yeah.
I agree 100%. Okay, let's talk about bike talk. How long have you been doing it? And tell me a little bit about it so I can share it with my listeners.
Absolutely. Nick Richards started Bike Talk around 2010, and it was on underground radio when it was a very different environment. In fact, he would used to make a joke about he went for quantity, not quality. And, he would have people on and they would talk, and it was on underground radio. Then I got kind of involved in the late teens, but because we were still working out of the KPFK radio station here in Los Angeles, that was a little bit of ways from my house, so it was difficult to get to on my bike. And so I didn't really fully get involved until COVID, until late 2019, early 2020, when we could do like you and I are doing now on Zoom. And that really opened up the door to having politicians from
Mhm.
Washington, journalists from the New York Times, advocates from all over the country and even all over the world. Um, and so I've been involved about 6 years now, and we are on the radio in about 16 markets around the country. But most people listen to us online at either biketalk.org or on Spotify or Apple Music or really wherever you listen to stuff. And the real thrust of the show is advocacy about how the bike is not a toy, it's a tool. I don't know if you saw the movie this summer, Marty Supreme, about the ping pong player. Well,
Absolutely.
I'm a big ping pong player, and I read a book about this guy, Marty. I forgot what his last name is, and he's a real character.
Real
And
character.
he said in the book, what ruined ping pong was in the 1950s and 60s, everyone got a ping pong table and put it down in their basement. And ping pong became a game that kids
Yeah.
played, not something that you would go to like a pool hall or a ping pong parlor and actively, compete and play serious ping pong. And I feel that the bike has suffered a little bit of the same fate that so many people ride bikes as a child, but then when they get their driver's license, they think, oh, a bike is for children. And so they don't really take it seriously as the transportation instrument that it is. And I think one of the great things about the ride that I'm doing is it's proving that you can ride from San Francisco, from your daughters, to Michigan, to your dad. Not that everyone needs to or everyone should, but if I can do that in my 60s, someone else can ride to Trader Joe's to pick up a few things if it's safe. So we on Bike Talk are trying to create an environment that celebrates the bicycle and then nudges, pushes, forces our political leaders to create safe environments for whoever chooses to ride to ride.
We both live in LA, and let's face it, despite the weather, we are light years behind other cities in bike infrastructure.
Yes.
And not only that, but the biggest disappointment to me is that we fund or we vote for these projects, they're funded, and then they're never finished. What are your thoughts about that?
It's cowardice of political leaders. It's not understanding the data that is out there that proves that too often the argument becomes about bike lanes and not about safe streets. I'm trying to think of some streets that maybe we both know. Fountain Avenue that kind of
Mhm.
goes through West Hollywood. It is a broken street. It is really wide in some
In
areas.
all ways.
Yep. And it's really narrow in other areas. There's parking, there's no parking. The street does not work well for anybody. Certainly not for pedestrians, because you don't see anybody walking along it. And it's a neighborhood street, really. It
It
cuts through a
is.
neighborhood. You don't see any people riding bikes on it because it's not safe. And cars crash into other cars all the time. So I think if we can change how we talk about safe streets and take it away from bike lanes and just bikes and talk about it as this is a broken street. We need to fix this street. It's not serving anybody well. And how do we fix it? Well, one of the great ways of fixing it is narrowing the lanes, slowing down the traffic. And when you do that, you create space for a bike lane. So you're not doing the project to put in a bike lane. You're putting in a bike lane because you're redoing the street and now you have room. And now, and again, using Fountain as an example, there are churches and synagogues and parks and schools and grocery stores all along parts of Fountain Avenue that people could then ride their bikes to. You don't have to get in a car to go to the Ralphs on the corner of Fountain and La Brea. You can ride your bike there if you choose.
Yeah. I mean, safer streets, slower streets. It's not so much about bike lanes as it is, making traffic safer at the same time. I wrote a lengthy article on this on my Substack, and I interviewed Dan Brotman, who's a
Oh,
council
sure.
member
Yeah.
in Glendale. And Glendale, one citizen circulated a petition and got the board to reconsider a bike lane project. It was actually a slower streets project that they had. Because of the outcry, the majority of the council members voted to pull up the infrastructure that they built. And
Right.
it was really, at that time, it was really considered a beta test to see how it would work. They never even finished the time period that they'd allocated for that beta test. And
Right.
he said the lesson that they learned is communicating to the public that we're not taking away your parking to put in bike lanes. we're taking away parking to slow down streets so that everyone is safer. And that includes people that are driving cars.
Absolutely.
But that just seems to be the hardest ideal to get across to the general public.
Well, it's 70 years of status quo,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't like change. A friend of mine, when I was in North Dakota, a friend of mine sent me an article from one of the little local newspapers around LA that someone had written, sort of explaining why bikes will never work in a city like LA, saying, LA's not Amsterdam and LA's too big and it's too, people don't want to ride their bikes and stuff. And this person who wrote this article is not a transportation expert,
Mm-hmm.
is not an urban planner, is not someone who studies how transportation and traffic works. He's just a person who wrote an article that is full of misinformation. And one of the things we try to do on Bike Talk is get the word out there that bike lanes make roads safer. Bike lanes help local businesses prosper. They bring in more receipts than a street that does not have a bike lane or that street had before the bike lane went in. There are so many arguments that this person made in this article that really are frustrating because he's talking like he's a planner. If he had said something about the sewers, we would say, you're not an engineer. Everyone feels they have a little bit of something to say about transportation.
Everybody has an opinion on bike lanes, that's for sure. All right, so biketalk.org. I want people to make sure they check that out. After you finish your trip, what's next for Taylor Nichols?
Boy, that's a good question. What I am learning on the trip is to really embrace the day. And living in Los Angeles and being an actor, I worry a lot about jobs.
Mm-hmm.
What auditions do I have? What jobs am I going to get? I'm on the board of the Road Theater Company, which is a theater company in Los Angeles, and so I do a lot of stuff with them. I've directed plays with them and acted in plays there. So I'm always thinking about what's next as opposed to what's right in front of me. So I'm hoping the lesson that I learned from this trip is be more present in the day that I'm dealing with right now and not worrying so much about tomorrow. Because sometimes you miss today by worrying about tomorrow.
I think that's fantastic advice. Taylor, it's been an absolute thrill to have you on the show. I wish you the best. And like I said, give your father my warmest regards and safe travels on the remainder of your trip. Good luck on your shoot. Are you in studio or on location?
We're on location. I'm the principal of a school, so we're actually shooting at a school because schools are out right now.
Good. I'm glad you're shooting in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
That's a good sign.
yeah.
Well, take care, my friend. Let's go on a bike ride together sometime. We're both in LA.
Brian, I would love that. I'm in the West Hollywood area and am always up for a coffee ride or a beer ride. So
Hey, coffee. Now you're talking. All right. Take care, my friend. Thank you again, Taylor Nichols, for taking time out between an epic bike adventure and an acting job to spend some time with me on Chainwheel Diaries. I'm also very impressed with his dad's volunteering work. Volunteering is good for the soul of the volunteers and its recipients. Bike Talk, the podcast hosted by Taylor Nichols and Nick Richard, can be found at biketalk.org or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Taylor on Instagram at taylornichols.bikelife. Chainwheel Diaries is available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can get the full video experience on my YouTube channel at Chainwheel Diaries. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Please subscribe and spread the word. Until next time, I'm Brian Berlin, and this is Chainwheel Diaries.